This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Attorney General, former Secretary of State Rufus Edmisten, former Speaker of the House Josephus Mavretic, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, and political consultant Brad Crone. Before we begin this show, Brad, I'm sure that the NC Spin family and all of us want to extend our condolences on the death of your mom recently.
Thank you.
Mildred Crone was a beautiful person, and she will be missed.
Thank you.
Well, the new budget year started July 1 without a revised budget from the legislature, and on this show we're going to talk about what the two houses have agreed to, what they can't agree on, and what we can expect. So let's get started. Prior to the beginning of this short session of the legislature, the lawmakers were confident they could come to Raleigh, revise the budget for the year starting last week, and adjourn by July 1. But the fireworks Raleigh saw was between the House, the Senate, and the governor. Both houses took a July 4th break without any signs when they might be amending the budget they passed in 2013, and Governor McCrory went so far as to enact budget-cutting measures. Dan Way from the Carolina Journal did some research and learned that since 1981, the legislature's only passed a budget prior to July 1 9 times. Of the rest, 6 were passed in August, 2 in September, and the 1998 budget became law the day before Halloween. You served in the legislature. As we said, you were House Speaker 2 of those years. Why can't lawmakers get a budget passed on time?
Well, they could if we had a constitutional requirement that says this is the constitutional limit to sessions. 30 states across the country have such limits, either calendar days or legislative days or date certain. No reason that North Carolina do it. All of the sister states around us have some kind of a session limit, and we need it. The problem is the people who must start the process for a constitutional amendment are the people in the House and the Senate. That's the block.
You're saying that the prison is being run by the inmates.
Well, I didn't say it exactly like that. You said that.
Rufus, we saw some interesting stuff this past week. Essentially, neither house met for all intents and purposes. We had a walkout by the Senate during the budget negotiations that were taking place. Is all of this just show? Is this theater, or are there some honest disagreements going on here?
First of all, last week when they had the walkout, I was reminded of a dysfunctional family at Christmas time, bickering. And I was around a long time, beginning in '74, and we saw Billy Watkins on one side and somebody else on the Senate. But it seems to me now as though you have a very loosely knit bunch of folks who love the cameras, because for the first time, Joe, I saw today negotiations going on in the open, and the cameras were there, and so they start acting up. It's just like when you do a courtroom drama. The defense attorney.
So are there real differences, or is this just theater?
Well, it's theater right now, and there are real differences. And the trouble is that our governor doesn't have what Jim Hunt and all the rest of them had. They had the clout, and our governor doesn't have it. So,
Tom, what's really interesting is Rufus brings up a really good point. You know, you had Ollie Harris, you had Kenneth Royal, you had real titans in the Senate, you had Bobby Etheridge, you had Liston Ramsey,
Billy Watkins.
You had internal fights within the Democratic Party for years, fighting out over the budget. It's just the horse of a different color right now. It's the Republicans in charge, and the Senate is clearly being more obstinate than the House.
All right, prior to the July 4th break, John, we were told that the big thing that was holding everybody up was Medicaid, agreeing over what to budget for Medicaid. The House made a move late last week to agree to come somewhere in between the worst forecast that the Senate had and the best forecast, which had been offered by the administration. Came in between. They've agreed that they're going to agree on those numbers. What's holding them up?
Well, the Medicaid dispute was very real. It did get resolved by both sides moving towards a centrist number. What we've got now is primarily a disagreement about how large a teacher pay increase should happen this first year of what could be series of pay increases, and number two, how to pay for it. The House is saying, let's do 5% now. Now this is essentially the governor's position as well. Let's do 5% now. That will not put so much pressure on next year's budget, the following year's budget, that we can do additional pay raises and work in this more professional, merit-based pay plan. The Senate is saying, let's go bigger now. We can do that too, but let's go bigger now. Let's take the opportunity to redirect money that's currently being spent on teacher assistants with not a lot to show for it in the second and third grade. Take that money and do a larger pay increase. The House is not buying that, and the Senate thinks that they have given on many other things. For example, attaching a pay increase to teacher tenure going away, and so the Senate is waiting for the House to come to them some.
And specifically, Brad, this 11% pay raise that the Senate wants to give to teachers is going to cost $465 million. Now, they're saying if we're going to give 11%, the money's got to come from somewhere. They got into another big fight this past week over the lottery and how much money they could get out of the lottery. But even so, $465 million, the Senate's position is it's got to come from teacher assistants because we can't cut education much more. We ain't going to raise taxes.
And that's extortion for the next generation. It's extortion on our public school systems. It's absolutely obstinate that the Senate's taken that position.
But you've been involved in these negotiations before, Joe.
There are two things that we should not overlook. First of all, staff numbers have been pretty well accepted across the board, both the House and the Senate. The argument really isn't about the numbers themselves, it's what you do with the numbers. That's the first thing. The second thing is, this is a legislative war. It really doesn't involve the chief executive. As a matter of fact, we've had long sessions with 5 governors of 2 parties. So this is really legislative stuff, really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the executive branch.
Yeah. Let me say another word, if I may, about Medicaid. They're getting the cart before the horse. They need to decide what form it's going to take before they start trying to find the money.
Let me raise that issue.
Yes.
Is Medicaid reform actually, you've said on this show, John, you thought we were going to see some Medicaid reform, but they're still miles apart on how to do it. The Senate wants to reduce the roles of the aged, blind, disabled, and medically needy. The House wants to go with these affordable care organizations.
Accountable care.
I'm not affordable.
Whether they would be affordable is another question. The debate about Medicaid reform has a couple of different layers, and the big macro layer is, do you go with a provider-led series of networks that might be somewhat or largely at risk to cost, or do you have managed care companies come in and compete for that business? That macro issue probably won't be settled this year, but there are some micro issues in Medicaid reform that are part of the budget negotiations.
Here's the politics of that, though, Tom. The legislators do not want to fight the House of Medicine going into an election year. And if you look at managed care, the big secret there, if you do that, it's the state will have to lay out an extra $1 billion to transition from fee-for-service over to managed care.
We've got the Common Core, we've got charter schools, we've got vouchers, we've got other issues that are involved in this, and I want to get back to them in just a few moments. But for those of you saying you'd like to have more NC Spin, I've got good news. You can have additional video content from our panel right here and from other leading opinion makers, all on our website, ncspin.com, all through the week. After each show, we tape what we call the After Spin. Our panelists tell you what they wish they'd said on the show, as well as give us their comments on other topics. And in addition, we've got perspectives posted throughout the week in print and video. So keep up by visiting ncspin.com. Also catch us at NC Spin on Facebook and at NC Spin Tweets. Balanced debate for the Old North State. Back with more in a moment.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Baseball players from other countries are considered guest workers here. Baseball, the previous administration and Congress cut a deal in 2006 allowing foreign players to travel freely across the country. Not so for agriculture guest workers. They're vilified for doing work Americans won't, and they face a mountain of red tape just to get here. Shouldn't American agriculture get the same consideration as baseball? Farm Bureau and Agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
Your family physician supports Medicaid reform. That's good for North Carolina patients, providers, and taxpayers.
For over a year, we've worked with the Governor and the General Assembly on a plan for responsible Medicaid reform.
The Senate's proposed Medicaid changes are a departure from this plan. Changes that could lead to a decrease in the number of primary care physicians providing care in communities that need them the most.
The destruction of our state's medical home network, a network that prevents unnecessary hospital and emergency room visits.
And disregards the elderly, the blind, and disabled, and the health care they need. Care we're morally and legally obligated to provide.
Now is not the time to disregard the progress we've made. Now is the time for lawmakers to implement responsible Medicaid reform that protects and improves health care for all North Carolinians.
Visit rnchealthcare.com and tell your lawmaker to support responsible Medicaid reform.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue our discussion about when and if we're going to see a budget revision taking place. There are a number of other factors that are in this discussion. One of them is on Common Core, the Common Core curriculum. We've talked a lot about that during the course. The two sides finally got together and decided to agree on the Common Core curriculum. But, Joe, essentially what they decided was that they were going to go back to the State Department of Public Instruction and let them pull out what they thought was the best parts of Common Core and implement them in. But isn't this the same bunch of people that got us into this mess to start off with?
Fundamentally, yes. And I think most people who track education in North Carolina, and we're talking K-12 here, know that continued fiddling with the tests themselves does nothing but create turbulence and keep us in a bad situation.
Just being clear that the bill creates a commission.
Yes.
It's not DPI.
Right.
It's a commission. They'll be staffed up, and they're going to review the standards, and they're going to pick parts they want to adopt standards from elsewhere. Basically, it's another set of
But what qualifies them for doing that?
The people who will be placed on the commission are going to be educators and policymakers and policy analysts and so forth.
Right.
And the bottom line is the dispute was about the House. A version of the bill in the House said nothing from Common Core can be deemed acceptable. Well, that was an unworkable rule. Obviously, there are elements of Common Core that any curriculum would have in it. So that had to be fixed, and it was.
Rufus, the governor says he's going to veto a bill which allows charter schools to withhold information on salaries and so forth like that. You were Attorney General of the state for a number of years. It's gotten to be a lot of controversy. Is he right about this?
He certainly is, because how can you have
public
money going to an institution and say you don't have to be accountable about it? I'm very disturbed about that. I'm disturbed about the separation of powers that's going on in North Carolina right now, but we'll get to that later.
I wrote a column about that a week ago called Separation Anxieties, and I said I thought he was right about it. Brad, one of the things that's going on is in the voucher program that is now moving forward, but we got the information that 2 of the top 3 schools that were picked for parents to send their children were Muslim. This caused all kinds of ruckus among people. Should it?
Well, they get what they pay for. And the Republicans have been pushing this, so it's only appropriate that they end up with in a situation that they otherwise probably wouldn't have prescribed or
let's just
subscribed
be real clear
to.
about this. The Republicans were not surprised by this. It was a few media people that weren't following the issue. I started a voucher program, helped start one in Charlotte back in the 90s. It had hundreds of kids in it. One of the top recipients was always the Muslim school in Charlotte. Anybody that's been involved in school choice knows that the Muslim schools will be involved, and there's been no pushback among school choice advocates. They were not surprised by this. They don't think it's that big a deal.
Another big issue, Joe, is involving the film incentives, which due to expire, and the governor wants to start a grant program. The Senate wants to continue some sort of a program. The House wants to do away with them altogether. What do we know about what's going on here and what should happen?
Well, I think the question is, what kind of outlay from the filmmakers are you going to require for some state assistance? And I think that's going to happen. It's interesting to me, the unintended consequences of a lot of things. If I was in the General Assembly, I'd say, I'm not so sure I want to have a short session.
Yeah. It's
Well,
not doing them a lot of
I was on the
good.
film commission at one time, Tom, and I can tell you that for my money, I don't like any incentives. I think you pick and choose. I think we've got an incentive mania, but if anything I would put them on, it'd be the movies, because they come and go and leave you alone.
John, I want to get to this coal ash situation because we're running out of time again in this segment. The Senate passed a version of the coal ash bill. The House passed a version of the coal ash bill. Some critics say that the House took a weak bill and made it worse. The governor is upset about it because it creates a 9-member commission and he gets no appointive power whatsoever with it. When we are sitting down to record this program, we still don't have a resolution as to what's going to take place on coal ash. There's
a separation of powers problem that you were getting at regarding an executive agency and who should staff it. On the other hand, the dispute between the House and the Senate really wasn't on much of the substance of the bill. Speaking of time running out, it was all about deadlines. It was about whether the state is going to at some point in the future be flexible to allow Duke to meet the deadlines. The senators were saying, why do that? They've had plenty of time already to get started. Let's set some firmer deadlines. That's the nature of the dispute. Well, the good thing about both bills is that they have in it provisions to encourage reuse of coal ash. Coal ash is a substance that has very, very low but not zero risk. It needs to be reused effectively as it is done in most other places.
Well, we're going to burn the coal during these next few moments for some words from our sponsors, and we're going to come back and talk about the Senate election. Stay with us.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
CCANC is an organization that really tries to help everybody enjoy their moments fishing. They try to help create awareness. They also work on trying to protect our resources so that it'll be there for our children as well.
I think another consistent theme that we all have is we want to leave the resource in better shape than we found it.
You know, CCA do so many different things, be it a habitat project, restoring oysters, maybe working for good conservation and good management, going fishing and sharing a passion for a healthy resource.
There's plenty of fish for everybody. There's fish for commercial guys, there's fish for recreational guys, if it's managed in an effective and scientific way.
We have that world record style fishery here, but we've got to make science-based management the future of our fisheries management policies, and then we'll be moving forward, and our legislature needs to know that.
Become a member today at ccanc.org/join.
We now return to NC Spin.
Last week we talked about November's elections, but a new poll commissioned by the Civitas Institute shows Senator Kay Hagan with a 6-point lead over House Speaker Thom Tillis, even as Republicans are criticizing Tillis for either spending too much time on the campaign trail or not enough. Brad, is it too early to believe the polling data? I mean, what message should Thom Tillis be getting from the feedback he's getting?
Well, Tom, I don't think that it's too early to begin looking at polling data. A number of firms, Civitas and PPP, have been tracking the race since early part of the year. The one thing that Tillis has to pay attention to is that this is the first time that Hagan's opened up a substantial lead once he's had the nomination, and he's got to pay attention to that. One thing, Hagan has been very effective in building a ground organization that's unsurpassed of any Senate campaign that I've ever seen in the history of the state. They're out knocking on doors right now, and she is building momentum.
John, one of the things that I found interesting in the discussion during this past week is the polls also showed the Libertarian candidate with between 8 and 11 points. Now, obviously, he can't win the election.
No.
But he is going to be taking votes away from one of the other two candidates. And my question is, who's he taking the votes from?
Well, that's a good question. Republicans usually assume the Libertarians, who usually overlap with Republicans a lot on economic questions, mostly take votes away from them. Actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It depends upon the situation. In this case, it is likely that Hall is taking away votes from both sides. In fact, we know that that's true. There's been some limited polling on it. Now, it's not true that Sean is going to get 10% or 9 or 8% of the vote, but he might get more than the usual very small number. And the assumption that this all comes out of Hagan and therefore, out of Tillis and helps Hagan get reelected is probably true in many states. But in North Carolina, I'm not so sure. There are lots of people who might throw a protest vote who might otherwise not vote, and therefore it doesn't change the outcome.
Tom, if Tom Tillis loses this race, when he sits down the night after and looks in the mirror, he's going to say, I should have resigned as the Speaker the day I announced for the Senate.
Yeah, we talked about that on the show last week. The question I want to ask is, where are the unaffiliated? We got 26% of the registered voters in North Carolina now registered as independents and unaffiliated. Where are they going in this election, or is it too early to tell?
I'm going to disagree with John. I know that one time when I ran for Secretary of State, John Carrington might have beaten me had it not been for the Libertarian vote that was stolen away from him. And very frankly, I think the unaffiliated is going to swing over toward Kay Hagan. And let's point this out too. She does very good constituent work. A lack of constituent work has beat a lot of good people like Robert Morgan, Terry Sanford. Kay Hagan's office does a good job.
The main reason why Hagan is up is because or people on her behalf have been up on the air. And nobody has been up on the air for Tillis or by Tillis. So if that changes,
the Koch brothers have run.
But that was earlier.
Yeah,
but I mean,
$6 million just wearing her
recently Hagan has been up, Tillis hasn't, and that's why she's regained some ground. I mean, it tells you that you want me to say this, Brad. It tells you that advertising works, and you ought to hire good consultants to run ads.
And they ought to run the ads on NC Spin. That's the way it works. All right, when we come back after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
One of the best parts of the show is when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. So we're going to put the question to them. Rufus Edmisten, tell us something we don't know.
Sort of personal. 41 years ago this month, I served a subpoena on Richard Nixon for the White House tapes.
You personally did?
I personally did, first time in history. And the way we're going under that Supreme Court decision, we're going to have another Watergate before long.
Interesting prediction. Joe Mavretic, tell us something we don't know.
There's an infestation of nocturnal hodags in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's spreading to Charlotte and the other MSAs.
Please tell me what a hodag is.
What is a hodag? Pray tell.
Google it.
Good. John Hood, tell us something. We already found out something we don't know, what a HODAG
something
is.
that we didn't want to know.
Yeah.
The federal government just put out the latest economic growth numbers for all the states in the country. So I went and pulled the last 2 years of economic growth in all 50 states, and there were 11 states that did significantly better than the national average. Only one of them is in the Southeast, and it is North Carolina.
So say that again then.
Much higher growth than the gross state product in North Carolina than most other states, and by far the highest in the Southeast.
Wow. Brad Crone, tell us something we don't know.
Ran a poll of unaffiliated voters in the state last week, Tom, and they're fed up, they're angry. The question is, will they turn out at the polls? But clearly, the obstinates that you're seeing in the state Senate is hurting them. That's going to cost them more seats. If the unaffiliated voters do show up, they're going to lose more than 3 seats. It could be 5, 6, 7 seats.
So they could lose their veto-proof majority.
Absolutely.
Wow, interesting. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, catch NC Spin on Facebook, and particularly catch NC Spin Perspectives this week with Professor Andy Taylor from NC State. Tune in next week when we take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. And until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.